Hey everybody, welcome to Preaching Donkey. My name is Lane. This is actually part 2 of a 3-part playlist that I'm putting out on how to create killer sermons. I'm calling it the Killer Sermons Workshop. This video is all about a little rule that I like to call the verse to point rule. I think it's going to be super helpful for you. If you like content like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Don't forget to go to preachingdonkey.com/21days to pick up my free 21-day guide to creating killer sermons, which is a great complement to videos like these. With that said, let's jump right into part 2 of the workshop. If you haven't watched part 1 of this workshop, you definitely need to go check it out. We laid a foundation for what makes a killer sermon. What is a killer sermon? We answered that question. And then we looked at what are the key ingredients of a killer sermon. In other words, how do you make a killer sermon happen? How do you produce a killer sermon? And so today, I actually want to drill in on one of those aspects of a killer sermon and give you a little tool you can use. So one of the aspects of a killer sermon is tension, building tension. Now, we talked about how tension can be built in a lot of different ways. It's this kind of idea that you allow a problem or a question to persist before you answer it or before you give the solution to it. So you don't go straight from, we all worry, to here's the answer to worry, Philippians 4:6-8. Before we get to that, what we're going to do is allow people the opportunity to feel the problem, to feel the tension. That's called building tension. And it can seem complicated, but it's really not. And so what I want to do today in this brief training is I want to give you a simple tool. I call this the verse to point rule. And what this means is that typically, when I was taught to preach in seminary and when I've observed a lot of preachers preaching, typically this is the pattern it takes. You will make a point. Okay, let's say that you have a bottom line, a main idea for the day. You get into your passage and you say, okay, here's the point. Do not worry. Okay, whatever the case may be. But before you make the point, you don't really build any tension towards it. You just make the point, and then what follows is the scripture that supports the point. This is a very common way to deliver a message. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, but I've actually discovered a very simple tweak that if you just reverse the order of that, then you can get so much more out of that point. And here's why. Once the cat's out of the bag, okay, think about this. Once the cat's out of the bag, once the point's been made, the listener has the chance to kind of look at it, see the words, and now you've got to go and argue the merits of that point. So you make the point. This is a standard way of doing it. You make the point, okay, the people hear it, they've got no real context for it, and now you are on this journey of proving that point. Okay, now let's go to the scripture and see where we find it. Okay, now let me give you some examples and illustrations, and let's just make this point make sense to you. And you've already heard the point. The tension's already been released. That's what I'm getting at. If you just reverse that, the verse to point, instead of point to verse, verse to point, verse, point, verse first, okay, the passage first. So you're walking through the passage, you're reading the verse, and you're massaging the tension. You haven't made a point yet. At least you haven't made your next point yet, but you're allowing that tension to build. So you're reading the verse. And you're walking through it. And if it's one of Paul's letters, for example, you're talking through the nuances of how they would have received it and how we receive it as modern readers and how they would have received it as the original readers and what Paul meant when he wrote it. And you're building tension around those ideas. You're also maybe building tension around how does this work in real life, and is this possible, and does this apply to me? And you're letting all of that sit before you actually make the point. And here's why this is so important. In this moment, you have people's attention. If you do this right, you have their attention, which was the first key ingredient of a killer sermon. You've got their attention because they want to know, does this tension resolve? What does all this mean? And then when you give the point, so you've done the verse, you've done the passage, and then boom, you reveal the point. Here's what that does. It brings so much clarity to the point because now they have context for it. It's not some foreign idea that's kind of out there that you've got to go now prove. You have already proven it. You've already built the tension up against it so that when you reveal the point, people are like, oh, I get it. I get it. So one of the things I like to say, this is just a helpful nuance, is when I'm going through the verse and I'm about ready to reveal the point, I will say something like this. Okay, I've got my TV, I'm reading the verse on it. I'll say something like, we've wrestled with all this, and I've thought about it, you've thought about it. You know what this tells me? You know what this says to me? Here's what it is. Boom. And then the point shows up on the screen, and it's the reveal. It's the idea. Okay? It's biblical, it's rooted in scripture, it's not just my opinion. Okay, it doesn't really matter what I think, all right? But what I'm trying to get them to do is wrestle with the text first. I think so many pastors were so used to prescribing answers, we rob people of the search. We rob people of the journey. And so one of the things that you do when you put the verse ahead of the point is you're teaching people how to think. You're teaching people how to read the Bible for themselves, because you're walking them through what it's like to wrestle with the text before you jump to a conclusion that just answers it for you. And so to put this into action, like literally this week, here's all you got to do. Take your outline, and if you currently have your points made and the scriptures that are that you're going to talk about that happen, like if you're walking through a passage, let's say, you got the whole passage, you're going to make a point here, make a point here, make a point here, okay? And right now, it's like a block of text, point, block of text, point. We'll just move those around. Go instead of point, block of text, point, block of text, do the text, then make the point, do the text, make the point, do the text, make the point. And then with each point that you're making, you want to always teach, illustrate, and apply. So there's 3 things that you do with every point. So the first thing, teach, you're covering a lot of that in this method before you ever even make the point, because you're teaching the text. That's where the truth is. That's where the principles are. So you're walking through the text, you're wrestling with it, and then boom, you reveal the point, and it kind of teaches the principle of the text. And then you go 2 steps further to drill the point down even further. So you've taught it, and then you illustrate it, and then you apply it. And it doesn't have to be in that order, but that's a really helpful framework. So you teach it, then you make the point, then you illustrate it. Here's what it looks like, okay? Teaching is, what does it mean? What does this point mean? That comes from the text. Then you give the point, then you illustrate it. This shows what it looks like. If you think about it, I have a lot of kids, children's books. I read to them. It will say written by and illustrated by, right? The illustrator, the person who illustrates it, is the one who shows what this looks like. Hey, you got these characters in the story. Here's what they look like when they're drawn out. And sometimes those illustrations make no sense to me, right? But somebody illustrated it. And in a sermon, when you illustrate a point, you're just saying, hey, this is what it looks like in real life, okay? That's an illustration. So you teach it, you illustrate it, and then you apply it. So each point, you're giving people tools, actionable tools to walk away and say, okay, if this was important enough to draw out of the text and say, here it is, let's look at it and illustrate it, and then we're going to apply it. This is what it looks like when this point is applied. And so all of that is enhanced by that one simple change, that one simple tweak, where we, instead of going straight to the point and doing all of that after, we do the passage first, teaching it, massaging that tension, walking people through it, and then boom, we reveal the point. And when we reveal the point, it has so much more meaning packed in, because now we're not having to prove it. Now we just show what it looks like, okay? Teach it, reveal it, illustrate it, apply it. And that right there is going to make every single one of your points pop so much more. Now, here's the thing. I don't tell people that I'm doing this. I don't say, okay, now I'm going to show you some scripture, then I will reveal a point. I don't do that. I don't think it's necessary. I just do it, right? You just teach through the text. You say, hey, this is what I want you to remember from this. They're writing it down. You illustrate it. You apply it. You move to the next passage. And that keeps your sermon flowing in your mind. It helps to take them on the journey that you want to take them on. and it's a more compelling way to do that. That's just one simple trick. There's so many more ways to build tension, and there's more ways to do all of these things, which I hope you're seeing. The thing I love about preaching is inexhaustible, meaning that there's so many ways that you can improve on your skill and your craft. And yet, there's all kinds of ways where preaching can be confusing, where something that is so simple, like the verse to point rule, that's simple. Yet it can be confusing in our minds, and how do we put it together with other things? And so that's why I am going to open the doors to Killer Sermons Academy. It's a complete end-to-end system. It's an online course that you can take at your pace. It is going to be a complete system for saving time, for making compelling messages, for creating killer sermons like what we've talked about. So I'm going to give you more details to come, but be on the lookout for that. It's coming out very soon, and I want you to be the first to know about it. So it's only going to be open for a few days, and it's going to be a limited amount of people that jump in. And so I want you to be a part of it, but you got to jump on it right away. So more details on that to come. But for now, go ahead and check out the verse to point rule. Do it in your next sermon, and I will see you in our third training, where we're going to talk about the blueprint of a killer sermon, the blueprint of being a killer communicator. What does that look like over a span, over a ministry, over a lifetime? How do you not just do it in one sermon, but do it throughout your whole ministry career? We're going to talk about that in part 3, so don't miss out on that. We'll see you there. There you have it. That is part 2 of the workshop. I'm so excited to tell you more about Killer Sermons Academy, which is opening back up. You'll find out more in the next video, which is part 3 on the blueprint of a killer sermon. And so check that out next, and we'll see you there.